So good morning to everyone. This is the January 6th, 2022 meeting of the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission, and I'll officially call the meeting to order. As usual, before we get started, I'll quickly review the options for public comment. If you're joining by computer, tablet, or smartphone, you should select the hand raise option. If you're calling in by phone, you need to email landmark@denvergov.org with your name, the phone number you are using to call in, and the project that you would like to discuss. And then Jen, is there still room for I-5 available for anyone who wants, or is that not?
No, we stopped that unless there's some majorly controversial project that's coming in. Yep.
I will. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'll ask each commissioner to provide their name and what position they serve on the commission. We'll go in alphabetical order. I'll start. My name is Jane Chrysler, and I am chair and the preservation architect. Next is Tom.
I'm Tom Sella, general contractor.
And Mike.
Mike Coughlin, developer.
Andy.
Andy Duckett, MP, preservation architect.
Fred.
Fred Glick, property owner.
And do we have Jim?
Yep, yep, should be on there. Jim Gravener, 27-year lower downtown resident.
Is that all?
Is that all? Yeah. I remember it when.
And Heather?
Heather Vasquez Johnson, practicing architect.
And Steve?
Steve Wild, business representative.
Great, thank you.
Has joined us.
Yeah, John McIntyre, architect and member at large.
Great, thanks, John. Okay, so next item, we can move on to meeting record approval. Does anyone have any comments or clarifications on the December 2nd, 2021 meeting record?
Jane, I do. Just looking at when we made the motion to approve the October meeting record, Jim's original motion said October 7th, and then the amendment said the meeting record was for October 7th. So I feel like there's a date in there that's incorrect. So if we can just get that fixed, then I think it's good to go.
And Jennifer, you were muted, but I think you just, yes.
Oh, sorry, I must have clicked. There's a lag.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll absolutely fix that. Thank you for catching it, Heather.
Sure. So Jane, I move to approve the meeting record for December 2nd, 2021 with the date correction as previously noted.
Second.
Thank you, Heather, for the motion, and I think that was Fred for the second.
Jim.
Oh, that was Jim, sorry.
Either of us.
I need to get all the faces on my screen.
You beat me.
Okay, so let's do a roll call vote. Again, I'll go through alphabetically. So Tom.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Andy.
Aye.
Fred.
Aye.
Jim.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Heather.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
And Jane is also an aye. So the motion passes unanimously. Right. So we do not have any consent agenda items for today, so we can move directly to the design review agenda. And I'll start with the usual reminders of the process that staff will make a presentation, followed by questions by the commissioners. Any applicant will have up to 10 minutes to make a presentation to the commission, followed by questions by the commissioners. Members of the public are welcome to comment for up to 2 minutes at that point. And again, if you're joining by computer, tablet, or smartphone, select the hand raise option. And if you're calling in, please send an email to landmark@denvergov.org to identify yourself and the project. At that point, after any public comment, staff can offer any clarifications, and then the commission will go into our deliberations. So the first item on our agenda is 2021 COA 534 1890 Wazee Street, the Dairy Block site lighting.
So our first application is for experiential site lighting within the passageway of the Dairy Block development. So this is the Dairy Block development. It's a full city block development that is comprised of new construction and historic buildings. We're specifically looking at the passageway today, which connects the alleyway running north-south with Blake Street, and is a passageway that separates the historic Windsor Dairy Farm building with the new development. So that is the area that we're looking at today for the site lighting. So the proposed site lighting will be comprised of two different style lights, a drop style fixture that changes colors, and a hoop light. The drop style lights will be below the proposed hoop lights, and you can see what those look like here. The existing lighting that is suspended above the passageway will be removed, and that's kind of that gooseneck fixture that you're seeing in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. And the existing wall sconces will remain intact for security purposes, as this lighting is not intended to provide any kind of security lighting. It's just experiential site lighting. So here is what the proposal will look like. The drop lights are mounted a little bit lower on the passageway at the pedestrian level to provide illumination at the lower level. And then the hoop lights are installed a little bit higher. So in these renderings that you can see here, you have the new construction, which is much taller than the Windsor Dairy Farm building, and then you have the Windsor Dairy Farm building. The hoop lights will actually be installed via a steel pole that will extend up above the building parapet of the Windsor Dairy Farm building. You can see that image here, and then I do have the dimensions in the staff report if you want to look at those. So in terms of the lighting, the Lower Downtown design guidelines suggest that lighting should be of a relatively low and keep with the overall character of the Lower Downtown historic district. Flood lighting is not permitted on exterior building surfaces, and the preference is that lighting be for sidewalk dining areas. So this lighting will be of a relatively low level. It is not intended to provide functional illumination, and it is not flood lighting. And it is intended to provide experiential lighting, but again, it's not for dining. This is for the passageway between Blake Street and the alley. In terms of the general design guidelines for Denver landmark structures and districts, the guidelines suggest that lighting should be coordinated with the historic streetscapes and buildings, and it should be a compatible design with the historic context, and should be coordinated with the street front lighting, and it should not conflict with street trees. So it does meet that guideline. It's not storefront lighting, and it will not be located on the primary facade as it's in the passageway, and it won't conflict with any signage. However, the design guidelines also suggest that lighting should be subordinate to historic buildings. So staff do have some concerns over the placement of the hoop lights, as they will be higher than the building parapet of the Windsor Dairy Farm building. So you can see again the attachment detail on this slide and how that will work with the building parapet. And how that pole will extend up above the building parapet to provide that attachment detail. It is slightly angled back at the very top to reduce sight lines, which you can see here in this rendering, but it is 2 inches wide and 4 feet tall, and the last foot is the part that will be angled back that is above the parapet. So we just have some concerns over that building, that placement in relation to the historic Windsor Dairy Farm building. So I do have some renderings to show this lighting. Here is obviously more of a bird's eye view of the lighting. Here you can see the hoop lights, and down below the drop lights. And then finally, here is a more street level view of that proposed lighting with the hoop lights and the drop lights below. And then finally, just one more view of that lighting as you're inside the passageway. So staff are recommending approval with conditions, and that condition is to reduce the height of the hoop lights to align with at least the building parapet of the Windsor Dairy Farm building. The applicant did include some alternatives in your packet that shows that lighting lowered a little bit, if that is something that the commission feels is appropriate. So I know that applicant has already provided some options for the commission to consider in terms of lowering that lighting and how that would look. So approval with conditions on this proposal.
Thank you, Brittany. Are there any questions for staff from the commission?
I have one, Brittany, and this may be a question for the applicant too when they get on. With the alternate options that they provided in their packet, are they proposing to hang the hoops in the same manner with the posts behind the parapet, or would those alternates have a different mounting option on the Windsor Dairy Farm side?
I believe I'd have a different mounting option, but that would be a great clarification for the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
I had a quick question if I could. The lower lights, those are on steadily and just change colors, or help me out with that. I'm just not flashing or.
So I don't think they're intended to flash, but they will change colors, and I would get clarity from the applicant on what the exact scheme would be.
Okay, but staff wasn't concerned that they might fall under the category of flashing or.
We weren't, because they can't legally do the flashing lights. We recommend in our guidelines, generally speaking, to use white lighting. However, we weren't super concerned with the color changing of this particular fixture, because it's not illuminating the building facade per se. It's more illuminating the streetscape and its interior to the site somewhat.
Great, thank you.
This may be another question for applicant, but just not quite picturing this. The hoop lights, are they hanging from like 2 points, and one of the points is a structure that sits on top of the dairy building?
Yes, so let me go back the slide. Oops, too many. So let me go back a couple slides. So on the left of your screen, or sorry, the right of your screen, the upper image is the attachment point on the Windsor Dairy building. It will be attached to the back of the building parapet, and it's a pole that extends up above the building parapet.
Okay.
And
is
then,
that visible from Blake Street? If I'm a pedestrian on Blake Street, can I see what's above the parapet?
I mean, you will be able to see it because it is 4 feet tall pole. It is very thin. It's 2 inches wide, but I mean, it's still a pole that you'll be able to see coming up. And then down below that is an anchor and bolt detail. That's the attachment detail for the new construction. Obviously not concerned about that attachment detail.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Brittany?
Maybe just a quick clarification. Brittany, is your concern with the height of the lights or the attachment detail? Or some combination of both?
I think a combination of both, because our guidelines, and this is the general guidelines for Denver landmark structures, 5.22 says site lighting shall be compatible and subordinate to historic buildings and the surrounding context. So we just have some concerns over, it both being located above the building parapet of the Windsor Dairy building and the fact that it is attached via that pole.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask something too, please?
Sure, of course.
So I'm wondering if it's clear about the attachment aspect. I mean, they've given an alternative option with lower lighting. What about that attachment pole?
So to be clear, the request today is for the higher height. They have, I have talked to them about lowering the height, and it's not their favorite option. And I think they will discuss why it's not their favorite option, but there are two alternatives in the packet to show how they could potentially lower the height. They would have to provide details on that attachment detail before we approved any plans if the commission stated that they needed to lower the height.
Yeah, I was just clarifying that they haven't indicated what that looks like then. All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. How far, the first hoop, how far back from Blake Street, from the public street is it? How far set back into the sort of alley, I guess, passageway?
So it is set back. I'm not sure we have an exact dimension. If you look at page 6 of your packet, you can see the darker lines are the hoop lights, and the kind of cross wires below are the drop lights where they'll be placed. So it is set back somewhat. But that's a great question for the applicant.
Okay.
There are no more questions for Brittany. I'd like to invite the applicant to join us and unmute themselves. And you have 10 minutes to make a presentation, up to 10 minutes. I think you did hear a few questions from commissioners that if you're able to address in your presentation would be great. And please just make sure to provide your name and address for the record.
And quickly, you all have a video animation. Do you want me to load that now, or do you want that for later? What order would you like it in?
It would be great if you can pull that up now just to have it ready. Yep. And if you can perhaps go to the first of the renders while we introduce our thoughts, that would be great.
I only have the one screen, Lisa. So
yeah,
gotcha.
So you got this, or you got the other?
Well, why don't we go here? Let's go back to the other, if you don't mind, and back to maybe you can go to the first of the renders. And actually, Lupe is going to lead off our comment and conversation with you.
Great. Is this it? Is this what
yes.
you're looking for? Great. Okay,
yes.
Just making sure. All right,
Thank
your
you.
time has not started yet. I wanted to clarify that before your time started.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I will start off. My name is Lupe Cantu with Davis Partnership Architects, and my address is 1551 South Layden Street, Denver, Colorado. I just want to introduce both ourselves as well as the ownership team and clarify that, and I'm sorry, I have an odd echo on my end, that Davis Partnership has been working with the Dairy Block ownership team and in turn with Landmark Preservation since 2016 with the development of the milk market. Our design efforts has always been driven by the ownership's goal in continuing to enrich Dairy Block's presence in the city as a focal point for placemaking. Obviously, this is in creating spaces like Milk Market and most recently the experiential art passage between the interior hotel lobby and the exterior alley, but most importantly in transforming the existing public spaces, such as through the comprehensive signage package the potential parklets, and as we were discussing today, the Blake Street Alley passage, all of which we think will strengthen the connection between the lower downtown and Dairy Block. With that, I'll introduce Lisa Bartlett, our head of architectural lighting at Davis Partnership, and Glande Coutier, the general manager of Dairy Block, to best explain how we intend to continue our efforts with the placemaking and elevating both the historic and modern through our proposed design of the experiential lighting along Blake Street. To answer very quickly, the comment regarding the setback of the lighting, we will need to confirm, but I believe it's in excess of 12 feet from the first hoop from the elevation of the frontage along Blake Street Passage. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Lisa.
Great, thank you, Lupe. And good morning, everybody. We are really happy to be here and speak about this incredible experiential art lighting installation, and really appreciate Brittany and staff's time in engaging with us in the conversation up to this point. And also some really wonderful questions, so thank you for those. Perhaps the place to start is just a note that we are looking at this as a way of creating experience. And so rather than thinking of it as site lighting, which we've all seen a lot of really bad examples of that. And as an architectural lighting designer, I can assure you that stuff drives me crazy. But we wanted to really create something that's a very sensitive installation that's more about experience and art, which is what the Dairy Block has done a great job of doing in this really wonderful historic node in lower downtown. But this particular area, Blake's Passage, is pretty underutilized. And I think Don Cloutier, from an owner's perspective, could reinforce that. And so the idea of what we want to do is to really increase that level of engagement at a pedestrian scale. But we have a second goal. And this is where the hoops come in. And so the downpour lighting, which you saw, and thank you for the question about whether there would be flashing. There will not be flashing. And we intend that to be very soft. In fact, the idea of sunset colors and this kind of soft fade to draw people in has been one of ownership's favorite approaches to the lighting. So no flashing, it's not intended to be that way. And these are pretty gentle, soft glow. That's the intent with the lower lighting and pedestrian scale. Again, appreciate that there's really seems to be pretty good acceptance of that approach that will really create this feeling that you're walking through this magical space. Our second goal was to really bridge the height delta that you can see on the screen between the higher, newer construction at 1835 Blake to the south and the lower Windsor Dairy to the north. Ironically, our predecessor firm, Fisher & Fisher, which has now evolved into Davis Partnership Architects, designed the Windsor Dairy. A little nugget that I thought was just this incredibly symmetrical moment as we consider how we want to approach this. And our design team and ownership team feel very strongly that the hoop lighting is actually serving to elevate the presence of the Windsor Dairy amidst the context here where frankly, it's a little bit dwarfed and made less important by the larger buildings to the south and the Maven Hotel to the west. So the hoop lighting shown as it's placed here is actually serving to bridge that height delta and really elevate that importance. But again, really appreciate the question about the setback of the hoops. They're back far enough that, and if you might, Brittany or whomever is driving, if you could advance, I'm not sure if you have the view in here that we shared of a distant perspective where you're pulled back a little bit. Was that included in this packet? The one where you just kind of out like at the corner of 19th and Blake?
So the commission has your entire packet. So if you just want to reference a page in the packet, that'd probably be better than
sure. Yep.
my presentation.
Absolutely. And so let me reference what that enlarged view is. It is, if we go, actually, if you look on page 5 of 17 of your PDF packet, the bottom image shows that neither poles nor hoops are visible from this perspective on Blake Street. We wanted it to be something that requires viewers to be close and engaged, but set back enough that we do not compete with either the historic facade or the newer building, being very respectful of those, that this is an experience that is very much confined to that passage with the intent of activating it and really helping to elevate the Windsor Dairy from that location. If you don't mind teeing up that walkthrough, we would love to share with the commission. It's just basically from Revit with Enscape. We just did a walkthrough and kind of captured the view. I will caveat this by saying that our Revit model has in it some relics of ramps and stairs that we all know are not there. That is not part of this proposal, but if you don't mind hitting play, we'll just walk through this. So the intent here, we'll just walk through this and then hopefully this shows our desired intent. You can see as you approach that you have to be almost aligned with the passage before you see that first hoop. They're also skewed to align a little bit more with the newer construction to the south. And as you come in, so this idea as you walk in, this downpour lighting is immersive. And when we pause, what we want is for passersby to look up and really see those hoops as this moment of awe. But we believe that having the hoops lower would actually compete with and detract from the Windsor Dairy facade. So at that, if they're at a lower placement, they're no longer an additive element. They become a subtractive element in our opinion. So we really love this higher placement because it really helps to bridge that height difference between the two buildings. And our mounting detail that is proposed is actually a slender T profile so that we, again, minimize the sight lines and the views. You can just catch a small glimpse of those mounting poles on the left. They're behind the parapet. Again, not touching the facade of the Windsor Dairy at all with our proposed mounting locations with anything that's that is new, the older historic construction. So with that, I'd love for Don Cloutier, who represents ownership, to weigh in on his point of view on behalf of ownership here. Don, if you're able to say a few words.
I'd love to. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You know, I have my own opinions, but I think it's really great hearing everybody else's too. I think it's really important we stay within the context of Lodo, where it was, where we all desire for it to go. So I really took a bunch of notes and appreciate the input that you guys have had. I think one of the comments from Lisa was underutilization of this passageway, and I'll kind of expand upon that as, you know, we feel like on Wazi with the Maven Hotel, Huckleberry Coffee and their patio, and Milk Market and their patio and their entrance, and then the activated alleyway throughout with our big gun lights that are under the mirror there where the new building bridges over the alleyway, and that dynamic lighting and the B lighting. We've really got some good things figured out. And this is an extension and a continuation of that immersive experience that we are lacking in Blake's passageway that leads you to Blake Street. And I'm quite certain that most of the folks on this call are familiar with the other enhancements we're looking to bring to Blake Street, being the 3 parklets that we have permitted and fully approved, and we're almost in shop drawings with those, as well as a large public art installation, which we're really excited to work with the art team at Denver to create a private art on public spaces opportunity where we pay for it, we maintain it, we adhere to all of the criteria, but it's additive to the streetscape in the same way that this would be additive to a little bit above the streetscape between the two buildings. And I think I'm very confident in saying that the Dairy Block and the designers and the developers and our team have done a good job of blending the old and the new. So the corner Windsor Dairy building, as well as the 1825 Blake Street new building, which is significantly bigger, significantly higher, and 100 years younger, really flows and blends extraordinarily well with the street as you drive along that one way of Blake or walk along. It's really remarkable how well those two blend, and these lights will only, as opposed to just the facade, allow for the heights of those buildings to be more congruent and allow the development to shine all that much more. And so I fully stand by
The 10 minutes has been up for a little less than a minute. So just wanted to let you know. Wrap it
Okay,
up,
yeah,
please.
then I'll,
Thanks.
if it's okay, I'll just ask for about 45 seconds to 60 and wrap it up. Is that okay?
Jane?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
That sounds good.
So I stand by the design, I stand by the team. We've seen, through Instagram and anytime I've ever been in the alley, which is just about every day, people taking the selfies and spending time with each other. And these lights provide another backdrop and an opportunity to do that and be a landmark within the city of Denver. And then, lastly, and unfortunately, 7-Eleven at the corner of 18th and Blake is now closed due to crime. Beta nightclub has suffered a multitude of homicides and really poor behavior, and they are now closed and shut down. These aren't security lights, but the lights that we have had up nearby are those gigantic police floodlights that make it daylight on the street corner every night from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. And so these lights bring a levity and a positive experience and a heartbeat to a neighborhood that's been suffering. And I would strongly encourage the group to understand the extent of the investment that Dairy Block will continue to make in Lodo alongside other larger development friends and neighbors to continue to combat that trend that's really caused the neighborhood to suffer. And I don't want to understate the fact that these types of installations go a long way to support the community as a whole. So I will stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So at this point, I will open it up to questions to the applicant from commissioners.
Maybe this is for Lisa. This is again just on setback. I don't know if this is visible on sheet AL 104 or not, but my question is, if the support structure for the hoop lighting is 12 feet back from the facade of the Dairy Block building, the Windsor Dairy building, and if it is 4 feet higher than the visible part of the parapet, if I'm standing on the sidewalk across the street, I'm on Blake, I'm on the opposite sidewalk, looking at the Windsor Dairy building, do I see any of the structure?
We can confirm that, Mike. We would just need to get to the right spot in our 3D model. And I believe Molly is on with us. Molly, I'm not sure if that's something that you can do. Perhaps we could move on to other questions and then go ahead and take a look at that here as we continue the discussion, if that would be acceptable.
Sure. My hunch is that you can't, or you can't see more than just this tiniest little piece of it.
Right.
Looking at, again, and maybe we can pull up AL 104.
And Brittany, did you need to interject?
I just quickly scaled the drawings, and the first hoop, based on the scale that I have in the drawings, is set back 19 feet 5 inches, not 12. As
so
is
that where the support pole is as well?
That's correct. Yes. That's where the pole would be. And Brittany, that sounds about right. So I think that's.
Sorry, I just wanted to provide clarity on that as I scaled it.
Thank you.
Okay, I think it's not visible probably as a pedestrian looking at the facade of the Windsor Dairy building. It might be worth confirming that. And if that structure is not visible, and if the hoops are quite far set back, then, I personally don't have any reservations about it, whatever it's worth.
I'm looking at it now, and because of that setback, I can't see it from across the street.
Okay.
Great. And thank you. That's Molly Obermeyer, who's been doing all of our yeoman's work. All of the renderings that you've seen have been her handiwork. So Molly, is that, so you're in the Revit model?
Molly, can I just beat this to death? What you can't see is the structure, the pole that sits on top of the Windsor Dairy roof, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Thanks.
Lisa, if you could maybe address the question that I had earlier, speaking with Brittany, that if we did need to lower the hoops, or if the commission felt that was the right way, would you modify how the hoops are attached on the Windsor Dairy side? Would they still have the support post Or how would those hang on the Windsor side?
Sure. Thanks, Heather, and nice to see you. Our team's approach and feeling on this is that once we lower those hoops, we really are competitive. And so there are two parts to that. First of all, it is the mounting, and we wanted to make sure that our mounting for the downpour lighting is actually, it's part of, there's a secondary facade that was built within the last 20 years, I believe, on that Windsor Dairy wall within Blake's Passage. And that's our proposed connection point for the downpour lighting. It's much lower. It's right above the lower band of windows. Yeah, thank you. You can see that photo at the corner. You can see that that's an additive masonry wall that goes up by about 14 feet, perhaps. Yes, thank you very much. We had wanted to make sure that we were not proposing any connections to the facade from the top of the parapet to the top of that wall, hence our mounting connections behind the parapet. And those have gone through structural engineering. So again, we've done our due diligence on that piece. If we lower the lighting, I would say that there are two concerns here. And the first concern is that we now subject ourselves to needing to probably have some sort of mounting that is on that part of the facade between the newer brick add-on and where we can effectively mount to the back of the parapet. And I think that would pose some concern, having some attachments of a structure there. The second piece is just, I think that there's, and Dawn, you might want to weigh in. Our team really we really strongly believe that lowering the hoop lights at that point then begins to compete with the pedestrian experience of the downpour lighting. And we sort of shot ourselves in the foot at that point. So we didn't necessarily come up with all the attachment details. Our study of those options was almost as much to say, we really believe that this doesn't work, as to say, here's a buffet of choices. What do you prefer most? We wanted to show them. Sometimes showing the options is a good way to prove that they really aren't as advantageous as our original preferred or recommended design option. Of course, want to hear the committee's feedback on that. But Dawn, did you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I think that scale is important. So scale between the different elements and maintaining that height delta is vital. And we've learned that lesson at different points throughout the alley between 18th and 19th and the main drag. We've had some really great looking installations on picture, and we put them up and they just look a little frail and dainty and dingy and dinky. So this scale, we've vetted it with real life attempts in other areas, and feel very strongly that dropping those hoops and hiding them, just basically laying them on top of the globe lights and then hiding them underneath the elevation of the Windsor Dairy building, you lose pretty much all of the effect. And just very little interest in lowering them. It'd probably be a better move for us to remove them from the scope if they really went too far in violating your guys' guidelines.
Other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I have
I've got a.
Go ahead.
Sorry, John.
No, you go ahead.
Just a quick question for Lisa and Don, and I think we've been kind of hit this particular topic, but I just want to kind of make sure it's clarified. The which I think we're kind of latched onto this as being lighting, would, because lumens coming out of it are probably relatively low and the amount of light getting to the pedestrian area, it's really more aesthetic. Would you describe this installation more as artwork than as lighting?
Absolutely, Andy. And thank you for picking up on that. That is our intent. And in fact, we have a full DMX control system planned for the downpour lighting that is malleable. And so there's that piece of it. And then the hoop lights themselves have limited lumen output to begin with, but we do have a control system designed that will dim them, so that the intent will be that they are at their sort of lowest comfortable threshold where they are perceived as being a softly glowing object as opposed to just a, you know, a solid, but we want them to be very subtle.
And I don't want to go overly cheesy, but since the holidays are fresh in our memories, and I'm from the Midwest, I almost see these as, and don't take offense to this, the kind of tacky holly leaves that you see up over the streets. It's really an art installation more. It doesn't, they're lit, but they're not putting any light out. It's really something that catches your eye and brings it up. It's not something that I would categorize as lighting.
Correct. Again, it's very much experiential, and it is very much an art installation. And you just beautifully summarized for us the single most difficult thing to convey about all of this. And really, we so appreciate everybody's questions about the technical aspects and the mounting details. But what you just said is the hardest thing for us to convey. We are thinking of this as art, and that's why we're calling it experiential lighting as opposed to site lighting. And that's the way that we've been describing it. So you hit the nail on the head, Andy. Thank you.
And as the preservation architect, I know everybody's talking about heights and everything. I'm more concerned about the brick. And what I appreciate is the connections for this installation are on the backside of the parapet. And I would assume this is, but I just want to ask the question, this is totally reversible. It seems like it's held together with a couple of bolts. If at some point you want to change the installation out, the bolts come out, the roofing gets repaired, and it goes away.
That's exactly right. There's
Okay.
Lupe, that was part of your thought process in this.
Right.
Right?
This was intended to be the light touch.
Yep. And then did have a concern actually with the lower level lighting, but you brought it up that there's actually a secondary wall that goes up 14, 15 feet. The attachments are actually for the lower lighting are in that secondary support. It's not going into historic masonry. It's actually going into a non-historic masonry wall that was added sometime 20 years ago.
Correct.
And even though I usually harp on people attaching into masonry units, it appears the way that this is mounted, and there's already precedence, is that these attachments are actually going to be into one particular masonry unit. It's not going to be spanning several units. So again, if this gets swapped out, non-historic brick, it's just taking that damaged non-historic masonry unit out and putting in a new unit.
Correct.
Okay.
And John, did you have some questions?
Yeah, I did, just a couple. And full disclosure, McWhinney's a current client of ours. Hello, Don, nice to see you. But it's not obviously going to affect my thinking on this one. Just had a couple of comments and thoughts in terms of the height. I tend to agree in terms of the separation of the two lighting systems, that, you know, having them too close together starts to erode the effectiveness of both. But I personally also like the idea of this transitional moment where you're scaling up from the adjacent building and sort of helping to bridge to the new building. I wonder if you'd thought through though just the positioning of that first hoop being slightly lower, so that just that first hoop sits within the alley and the rest kind of emerge up from it. So that one that's closest to the street almost, maybe just by lowering a little bit, would set itself in relationship to the historic building and then set that sense of transition and the idea of almost like these bubbles of light coming up out of the alley, which might maybe an interesting kind of subtle shift on the first stage that might just bring it into a slightly different alignment with the historic building. And I know you've looked at a number of options here, no doubt, but that just came to my mind. I guess the other piece of that is it's the layering of the circles themselves is really beautiful when you see them set in relationship to each other, like one through the other, as you do in those kind of elevated rendered views that you've got. And I just wondered if that lowering of that front end hoop might also allow maybe that experience to be achieved at a pedestrian scale in a slightly different way, you know, like with a forced perspective kind of intent. So just a thought and a comment as I kind of looked at the renderings and thought about the relationship, given other comments of the lower building to the higher building and this idea of transition. But more thoughts than questions, unless you've sort of considered maybe that aspect of it already and wanted to comment.
Yeah, I would just start and say that I think that has a lot of merit, that thought And then also, Lisa, if you don't mind just walking them through our thought process, the expansion and contraction of the density of the bulbs as you walk down the alleyway and how they disperse different intervals along the way.
Sure. Yes. And John, I think that's an interesting suggestion about lowering the first, maybe perhaps not all the way to be within the Windsor Dairy, within the height of the Windsor Dairy, but somewhere that really bridges that. So again, we're taking that concept even further. One thing that is a little harder to, and again, we didn't want to overdo on the technical, but I'm looking to see what page it's on. Perhaps if we could go to AL 108. So that's the sort of the most technical drawing sheet on here. And you can see the cross lines, actually the prior page where you were, it's the one that shows the plan. Yes, this is perfect with the plan on the right. You can see the lines of the catenary cable for the downpour that are crossing. And what we had done, in fact, we could place several sort of yellow zones in here that we had started by presenting this with sort of a light rain. That was the first concept. And McWhinney and the ownership team were very clear that they wanted a downpour. And so our concept has a concentration of these cross points at the strongest nodal points in the alley. So one near the entry, one kind of in the middle, and one near the end, where we want to focus the concentration of the drop lighting or the downpour lighting. And that is represented by the highest density zones where the catenary cables cross, and furthermore, the drop points that we have of those luminaires are at their highest density. So exactly what you're talking about, John, of this experience of drawing people in and creating these fields of alignment, we looked at that very carefully with the downpour lights. I think you do bring up an interesting opportunity to kind of start that force perspective by slightly lowering that first tube, and it really brings those concepts into concert.
Thanks.
Does anyone else have questions for the applicant? I have a couple just related to the alternates that are shown. It appears that in the proposed location of the hoops, that they are sort of densely arranged. And then in option number 1, it looks as though you've spread them out more. And also centered them, which I think in the proposed alignment that they gravitate towards the new building. And in option 1, alternate option 1, it appears that they're centered and spread out and lower than the parapet of the Windsor farm. So I guess my question is, did you look at keeping the arrangement as it is in the proposed option closer to the new building, and more densely, the heights being more dense, but just aligning it with the top of the Windsor parapet as opposed to being below?
Yes, Jane, we did. We took a look at just taking what we had and dropping it down, and it looked ridiculous. It was, the hoops were way too large. It confined in that space. They started to crowd the lower downpour lighting. And frankly, it was just so competitive. And so our gesture of being able to skew those toward the newer building sort of loses its, we lose our ability to do that very well when we're constrained in the narrow passage. At that point, it made a lot more sense to center these, and we had to scale them down. So again, I think that this shows an option that reads a little bit better in terms of scale, but we feel like it's very much a lost opportunity and just doesn't serve the experience nearly as well. And to our point of view, starts to detract from and compete with the Windsor Dairy. I'm looking at this. If you have a packet, it's on page 7 of 17. I think that's what you're referring to. Is that
yes?
Correct, Jane?
Yes. Thank you for giving the page number. Yeah.
Does that answer your question adequately, or is there more you would like to discuss on that one?
No, I think it was just kind of knowing that you did look at it, and the kind of thought process as to how that option evolved from what is being proposed. The other, and I feel like I will ask this question, but I have a feeling I know the answer, but because I think what we're looking at is, as far as our guidelines are concerned, are it's kind of two separate items in one sense with these hoop lights. One is the attachment to the Windsor building and how that's being accomplished with the poles that Mike was asking questions about, and the other is the lights themselves. Did you look into opportunities for supporting these lights that did not involve modifications to the dairy building? In other words, that they would be completely attached to the new building.
Yes, we felt the lightest touch was per the detail where you attach behind the parapet. Any other opportunity to attach to the dairy Windsor building would compromise the brick along the alley, the historic brick, or unfortunately would probably be a little bit more obtrusive with regards to sight lines with any kind of uniformal attachment above the roof.
And Jane, what you're asking is if we had looked at ways to mount, so for instance, from 1835 Blake to the Maven Hotel, is it just sort of a, I'm making this up, but completely leaving the Windsor Dairy out of the mounting consideration, at least up high, is that correct? Yeah. Lupe, do you have any thoughts to weigh in on that? I mean, I think we know that it would skew the hoops, so they're in a very different orientation and it really changes the experience, but any thoughts on the kind of the span or the challenges around that if that were to be considered?
Right, as mentioned, if we were to connect to anything other than the Windsor historic building, you would get a misalignment of the hoops. And then likewise, the connections would be more obtrusive than we're trying to provide.
And the misalignment would be because of?
It would twist the orientation of the hoop. The hoop would fall in line with the catenary cable that supports it. So any means of attaching other than perpendicular to 1855 or directly across from the alley would cause the hoops to change their orientation within the alley itself.
So they'd go from being perpendicular or, facing Blake Street as shown to being skewed at a, more than a 45-degree angle.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right? Does that make sense? Because they hang in line with the catenary cable. They're parallel to the catenary. So our catenary is now spanning just directly across that alley. But if we did some kind of mounting like this from 1835 to Maven Hotel, the hoops now they skew their orientation as well. And it obviously becomes a much less effective design statement in addition to the structural challenges of a much longer span and mounting way far away from Blake's Passage.
And it sounds like there's no kind of bracket that can just attach to 1835 that you need to have.
Correct. We do need 2 points because these suspend from it's basically a structured cable. And then there's wire on that and the hoop hangs from that structured cable.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, last call for questions for the applicant. Okay, at this point, is there, Jen, do you know if there's anyone from the public who is here who would like to comment?
Yeah, we'll put Brittany's moving the slide. So if anyone from the public would like to speak on this, please raise your hand on the hand raise button at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on the phone, click it's dial *9 and we'll know to call on you. Hearing none, seeing none, that means no.
Thank you.
And the applicants are being moved back over to attendees. You're going into deliberation.
Okay, and yes, thank you. Oh, yes, Brittany.
I scaled this first post also whilst I was scaling things. So this first post here is only 2 feet 8 inches tall and is set back 19 feet 5 inches according to my drawings and the scale provided in those drawings, which are the same as hers, but just wanted further clarifications since I was scaling. And there's 5 connection posts. So the tallest one is this one here at 4 feet, which is shown in the section drawing.
Great. Thanks, Brittany. And thank you to all those representing the applicant for your time and answering all of our questions. But now we can move into deliberation. So if we do have any follow-up questions for the applicant, we will let you know, but I'll open it up to commissioners for discussion. And Fred.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, one of the things that I think is interesting about this is that we are talking about a facade that in normal circumstances would be very secondary to our conversations. It would be in an alleyway. We'd be thinking about it much differently if they hadn't actually activated the alley, I think. So I just want to point that out because I do think that's an interesting consideration. I am supportive of the application as submitted. There is a question in my mind about how effective the hoops will be at that height and whether people will crane their neck to see them, but I'm not sure that that's not the criteria that we're here to judge it on. I do think it is, given its placement in the alley, et cetera, I think given the subordination of the attachment on the far side of the parapet, I think that it is subordinate to the historic building, and I think I can support it as submitted.
Thank you.
I appreciate all the comments and the notes, questions by the commission. I think Andy did a fine job of pointing out what I think it is it's a nice piece of art. And when we start designing art, I'm not sure. Wonder if the hoops were not lit. What would the review be at that point? Wonder if they were just like stainless steel and picked up reflective lighting. I liked the presentation. I thought and the questions and I think that they worked hard at this. And I think to enhance that experience going through there, because I've been through there, it's fairly dark and tight, and I think that opens it up. So I'm in favor.
Yeah, I think to your point, Tom, the question I think we all seem to be honing in on is whether or not, whether it's art or lighting or whether it's illuminated or not, is it based on our guidelines, is it subordinate to the dairy block building? And I guess since I'm talking, what I think helps support the argument of it being subordinate is the orientation towards the 1835 building, that in the renderings, it really appears to be a part of that building. And I feel like does not compete directly with the dairy block building. So in my mind too, it was, where Mike was going of, but we are attaching to that building, and how does that attachment, it is the least, in some respects, I guess, primary facade, and it is set back, and it is, at the back parapet. So I think just from talking through the guidelines, that's, I think that this proposal could comply.
I think it's substantially set back, substantially subordinate. I feel like it's as submitted, complies with our guidelines. And I don't want to, rush anybody, but it feels like there's perhaps I could make a motion. Would I be cutting anyone's comments off if I did that? Go ahead, or Jim, I'm sorry.
Yeah, one comment. I believe in the signage section of our guidelines, it says that downlighting when mounted to the building is forbidden, or words to that effect. And I'd ask staff about that. And if so, can we differentiate this by maybe calling it artistic downlighting or some other language that eliminates that part of it, or doesn't cause a conflict? And I'll let you, staff can look that up and see, it's a conflict right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you all are always, you have to follow the guidelines, but if there are guidelines that, if there's a unique circumstance that is not necessarily within the intent of the guidelines, then there could be some flexibility there. But you would need to be very clear as to why this is flexible in this one unique circumstance so that it's not setting a precedent or changing the guidelines.
I don't think staff to do the languaging of it.
Sorry, Jim, I don't think either of these lights could qualify as downlights.
No, well,
No.
Just want to be clear on that for someone who's just reading the guidelines and then saying, well, this is an exception that you've granted elsewhere and you got to follow the exception. It's an easy one to solve. And I think, Jen, you've got the right idea. Just some sort of an exception written in there, solidly reinforced. It's an easy one to take care of.
Well, and it doesn't have to necessarily be in the motion. I think it's part of the
Agreed.
deliberation as well. And just to clarify John's comment, you said you don't think any of these could be considered downlights. I'm thinking you meant uplights.
Well, Jim mentioned downlights.
Oh, okay.
So
Got
the
it.
guideline it says flood lighting. It's 7.2.1, and it says requirement general flood lighting of any exterior building surface is not permitted. And in the staff comment, I stated that lighting is not flood lighting and will not illuminate exterior building surfaces. I didn't apply any sign guidelines to this application as it's not a sign, so I wasn't looking at that sign appendix.
Thanks,
just for
Brittany.
further
That takes care of
clarity.
it. Yeah, that takes care of it for me. And I support the proposal.
As do I.
7.2.2 does specifically address exterior downlighting, which I think, was what was framing Brittany's comments, and it mentions shall be kept at the lowest possible level.
Yep.
And I agree that I don't think these lights are providing downlight. Maybe it's the architects in the group that are stuck on those definitions. But.
Well, then I move to conditionally approve application 2021 COA 534 for the new site lighting in the passageway between Blake Street and the alley of 1890 Wazee Street, as per the design guidelines for Lower Downtown Historic District Policy 7.2 and Guidelines 7.2.1, 7.2.2, the design guidelines for Denver landmark structures and districts, Guidelines 5.20 and 5.22, character defining features for the Lower Downtown Historic District, presented testimony, submitted documentation, and information provided in the staff reports.
Mike, you said you conditionally approved it, but you didn't give a condition.
I was trying to intentionally avoid that word, and then I just said it. Yeah, no conditions, approve as submitted. Thanks for clarifying.
So would that be an amendment to the motion?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you don't have a
maybe
second
not.
yet.
It wasn't seconded yet.
Oh, okay. So we can just say that the motion is without the condition.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you,
I
Mike.
would second.
And thank you, Fred, for the second. So we will move to a roll call vote.
Before you all vote, just a question on that motion. Mike, I just want to confirm, was the discussion that guideline 7.2.2 did not apply to this? Or are you saying that 7.2.2 complies?
I believe it does comply because 7.2.2 says its preference, lighting of sidewalk surfaces shall be generally discouraged except for defined areas. I think we have taken the position in our deliberations that this is not lighting of sidewalk surfaces. So it's not exterior downlighting. I guess I should strike 7.2.2 then if we think that's not applicable.
Well, as the one who raised the question, I think you have to somehow eliminate that as a possible precedent for future consideration. That's all. The way you've done it is fine.
Yeah, and as the person who mentioned the reference, I was indicating that I thought the proposal does comply with that guideline.
Yep.
So, Adam, are we good to vote?
Again, I just wanted to make sure that I was just unclear on the deliberation, so just wanted to confirm whether that was the intent or not.
Thanks. Okay, Tom.
Aye. Support.
Mike.
Aye.
Andy.
Aye.
Fred.
Aye.
Jim.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Heather.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
And Jane is an aye. So the motion passes as proposed unanimously. And thank you to the applicant for your time. Okay. Moving on to our next design review item. It is our, well, second and final, is 2021 COA 535 1420 Blake Street facade alterations.
Great, thank you. So here we have 1420 Blake Street. Here you can see on the left side of the screen, the site is located adjacent to an existing parking lot in the lower downtown historic district. On the right side of the screen here, you can see existing photos of the non-contributing structure. The assessor's records indicated that this was built in 1924. However, the structure has been significantly altered over time, and I haven't seen any photos that have been located to show what this original facade potentially looked like. So this is just it right now. Let's see. There we go. So the applicant is proposing to remove the existing non-historic stucco and rock face front facade. Here you can see where the new proposed openings are outlined in black dashed lines. This will just showing you where like new window locations are going to be on the new facade. And then here is the new proposed facade with a new storefront of brick with an aluminum window system at the upper story and metal composite panels between the windows. The bottom floor, there will be steel windows proposed. Materials are shown on the right side of the screen. The new facade will better blend with existing and new brick structures that are found within the district. The applicant is also proposing to add a new metal canopy over the main entrance. And then here is a side elevation. They'll be facing that parking lot. The side elevation is proposed to have stucco added at the side left. You can kind of see it. And the metal is just barely wrapping the front. And then here you can see the roof. This structure will also be re-roofed and will add additional mechanical units and skylights. I noticed in the packet, it was kind of put a little differently. So the front side of the building is actually to the right. But the nearest mechanical unit will be set back a minimum of 15 feet, meeting our guidelines. And then here's just an isometric rendering of the proposed alterations. The proposed front facade, roof, and side alterations
do help the non-contributing structure better fit the character of the district, meeting the design guidelines for primary elevations, alley elevations, and windows. Therefore, staff is recommending approval. That's it.
Thanks, Crystal. Are there questions for Crystal?
Crystal, this is a really minor question, but the parking lot that is next to the building, is that intended for development anytime soon, or is that owned by the current owner, or what's the city's zoning policy on that? I'm just wondering, another building possibly abut up against it, or is it going to be always open?
So I'm not sure. I don't know, but that is not part of this proposal. I haven't seen any proposals for it. But I would imagine if it is a separate lot, it could be developed.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, it's just a question about how the building would wrap the corner, and that's my question.
Yeah, and I saw Brittany would go off mute. I know that she's talked to the developer and applicants about that parking lot. There have been some proposals. In fact, I think you guys saw a concept review at some point recently, like the last year or two. Is that right, Brittany?
Concept was for this site specifically. I believe
not the parking lot.
Yeah, not the parking lot. So I believe the parking lot is not owned by the same building, and they haven't been able to acquire it. I do know if that they do, they probably will redevelop this site and the parking lot together. But as of right now, it's its own separate site, and it's been very hard to develop either one separately because of how narrow they are and parking requirements and those kinds of things.
There's also the problem or opportunity that the adjacent site abuts Cherry Creek at a completely different level. So that gives both some great opportunities and some real constraints.
Any other questions for Crystal? Okay, then I'd like to invite the applicant to unmute themselves, and again, want to let you know that you have up to 10 minutes to make a presentation. And if there are, I don't think we really had, or if you have any clarity to provide on the property next door, since that was the only question, feel free to, and just remember, please, to state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Jane. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, and I just wanted to comment real quickly because we have two people who are potentially from the public or potentially part of your project team. We're not really sure. Okay. So someone is on the phone joining us, which is wonderful. And then we also have a person whose first name is Jensen. And I don't know if they're part of your team. If they are, let us know and we'll promote them. If not.
Okay, we should have one of our employees that's working out of the country at the moment on the line. And okay. I believe they called in.
Okay, it's a 303 phone number.
Yep, that should probably be.
Obviously, well, not obviously.
Actually, anyway. let me see real quick. His number is, well, it's a 720 number.
Oh, okay. So if you are calling in and you're listening in, you can dial *9, and that will raise your hand, and we'll unmute you so you can join in if that is actually you're part of this project team. And go ahead. I just wanted to get that out there so you weren't waiting for someone.
Okay, I'll just jump in instead. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to get through or not, but my name is Rob Forslund. I'm Cord Design Studio in Denver. Yes, and we were hired by this client to kind of spruce the building up a little bit and make it feel more contextual with some of the adjacent buildings. As you know, the rock and the stucco currently don't relate to anything around it. So in redesign of this, we've tried to adjust the proportions of the windows, the style of the windows, and the materials to pick up on some of the horizontal lines of the adjacent structures, some of the proportions of the adjacent structures to make this better fit in. The adjacent parking lot is not currently owned by the developer that we're working with. He is trying to buy it or has tried to buy it. And so at the time being, he's just making this building more contextual and usable for some potential tenants. While in the meantime, he continues to try to either buy the land or not buy the land, but at least make some income on the property. Right now, we're just core and shelling the building. We do not have any tenants proposed. We are in for permit on that as well, but that's just kind of the overall view of what we're trying to do with the project.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions for the applicant?
Jane, I've got a really simple clarification question for the applicant. On page 5, it references paint and it's pointing to the lintels. What's the underlying material of those lintels? I'm assuming it was steel, but I wanted to verify.
That's correct. We're doing steel lintels to match one of the adjacent properties.
Okay.
Good question, Andy. Any other questions for the applicant? Jim?
Is it safe to assume that sometime within a reasonable time frame, you would hope to be able to redevelop the entire property and therefore come back with a design fitting into lower downtown, but perhaps different in approach?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. We would try to obviously fit in contextually and scale wise with whatever's developed, even if the adjacent land is purchased or not purchased.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, well then, since we do have 2 attendees, if there is anyone who would like to make, from the public, who would like to make a comment on the application, again, either raise your hand or dial *9.
The 303 number is one of our employees, by the way.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I was so excited we had 2 members of the public. I don't see any hands raised on this.
Okay, great. Well, then we can move into deliberation. And thanks again to the applicant. If we have any follow-up questions, we'll let you know. But
okay, thank you.
Commissioners, thank you. Fred.
Hi, thanks. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. There's some really nice materials being used. This is, I note, a non-contributing building. And I also, with regards to Andy's question about the neighboring lot, I think we have to work off of the assumption that at some point that lot will be developed in some way, shape, or form, whether in concert with this or independently. And accordingly, I think that facade, though it's exposed currently, I don't think we can impose too stringent requirements upon that facade. So I'm supportive. Thank you.
I'd like to just point out that anything they do is an improvement. And I want to thank them because it's a bit of a risk not knowing what's going to happen next door, but the fact that they're investing in this building regardless, I think is important to note, for which I thank them.
I agree with Steve's comment that anything they do is an improvement, but to loop back in, I think, I second what Fred said. These are high quality materials. They're materials that are typical of the district and are much more contextual to the neighborhood, even though this is a non-contributing structure. And so, and to kind of tie back to what I think Andy's question was about that adjacent property, and if there was any justification for wrapping that corner with the metal panel or something other than the stucco. And I agree. I think that we have to, because it's right on a property line, we have to assume that that will be developed at a later date, and it's not our property. That from a code standpoint, we're really kind of limited on what we can ask them to do in terms of, you know, they can't put any openings in, that kind of thing. And the justification for not wrapping that, I think, is solid. And that if something gets built up next to it, you don't want to have a expensive material on that piece, which is likely what would happen. So I'm in support of this application fully.
I just want to say thank you, Fred and Heather. That's exactly what I was getting at. I know on some other locations, we want them to wrap the material around the corner an X number of feet so that it continues that through line. However, as Heather was making my point more eloquently than I was, is you don't want to have them wrap an expensive material on the corner knowing that another building is probably going to be there. And you can see in one of the original photographs that the sidewall is actually clinker brick, probably from the original builder knowing that there was intended to be a building there. And what I didn't want to do is say, well, why don't we wrap the metal? It doesn't work because this is an urban environment. We wouldn't get there and we'd have a building there. So, and I just wanted to add that also that for me at least, the improved window portions fit better within district in terms that these are more in line with the proportions that you would see in lower downtown.
Thanks, Andy. Other comments or opinions, or if somebody feels like we're ready for a motion?
Sure. Jane, I move to recommend approval of application number 2021-COA-535 for the front facade and alley alterations at 1420 Blake Street as per Principle 2, Policy 2.2, Principle 7, Policy 7.1, 7.2, Principle 8, Policy 8.1, related to primary elevations, presented testimony, submitted documentation, and information provided in the staff report.
I'll second.
Thanks, Heather, for the motion and Fred for the second. Any amendments or final discussion? Otherwise, we'll go to a roll call. And as always, start with Tom.
I support, yes.
Mike?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Fred?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Heather?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
And Jane, also an aye. So the motion passes unanimously, and thank you again to the applicant for your time and effort. Okay, so that was our final design review item, and I didn't see anything on our agenda for either business or discussion items unless somebody has something they'd like to bring up.
I just was, you know, since my kid's school was closed, as of like 11 p.m. last night, I was fretting all night about what happens if we have a delay here or a closure or whatever, and how to get in touch with you all. So just wanted to remind you all, since it's been a long time since we've met in person, and it's been a long time since we've had any snow delays or anything, that to check the school, the closures on the news and things like that, there is a snow hotline. I will email that to you all. It has been hit or miss. There was one time that it didn't say anything on the snow hotline, but there was an email that went out to all staff. So, you know, we'll keep you posted, but if we do have virtual or in-person meetings and there is a snow delay or a closure for some reason, we will let you guys know. And I know we're meeting virtually, but so potentially a 1 hour, 2 hour delay might not actually mean anything. I don't know. This is all uncharted territory, so we'll find that out as we go along.
So Jen, just as a random question, if they You're having saying the scrolling closures on the news. Are we looking for closures at the web building or specific to
City of Denver.
City of Denver? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes it's city and county of Denver, sometimes it's city of Denver, sometimes it's Denver city offices. It's like, look under C and D. But I will also check my email, and we get text messages from the city as employees. And so we'll let you guys know as soon as we hear anything, if we do hear anything. We do not follow the DPS schedule in terms of closures, because we're here today. All right, that was it. Thanks very much.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Good to see you all
Bye.
virtually.
Take care.
Bye.